Welcome to my top 10 cinematic films of 2022 list. I know this is absurdly late in the year, it's already June as I'm recording this, but I have this problem. I have this mental defect where I cannot abide the idea that I might have missed something. Any film that might possibly have been in my top 10 or in one of my award shows, I have to see before I finalise my list. Which is a problem because it does take me quite some time to catch up with all the films I wanted to see from 2022, particularly when at the same time, back in February, March time, I'm doing my Oscar preview and review shows. So it takes me a long time to get through that list, but now I am finally in the position that I feel comfortable to release my top 10 films of 2022 list. And this is going to be the first of a series of videos which I'm going to discuss my top 10 cinematic films of the year, which is this video. I'm also going to do my top 10 streaming films of 2022. And I'm also going to do a personal award show, a personal Oscars, where I highlight the best performances of the year, the best films of the year, best director, best screenplay. I also do best young performer and best ensemble, and those videos will be coming at some point. And before those videos come out, I did want to highlight performances which are going to be in those award shows. So there's going to be a little badge, a little sticker on some of these videos, some of these recommendations, with performances and films which are going to win one of my personal awards. Now, since I live in Bath in the southwest of England, I've decided to call my awards the Golden Taps. It seemed appropriate. I mean, yes, it's a little bit silly, but in each of these categories, I will be giving a golden tap for the winner in the category and a silver tap for 3 honourable mentions in each of these categories. So when you see one of these little symbols, that is what it means. When I eventually do my award show, those are going to be the films that will be highlighted. So those are going to be sprinkled throughout the course of this video, and also at the end of the video I'm going to be having just a quick extra 15 films, some honourable mentions which didn't quite make the cut, but I do recommend, and they're going to be flashing by at the end of this video. So plenty of content for you, which is a horrible word, but here we go with my 10 most recommended films that were released cinematically in the UK in 2022.
Cinematic. Number 10.
I used to set this exact essay question in my ethics lessons. Should sex work be made legal? And every year 30 essays came back, all exactly the same.
What did they say?
That although the moral issues remain up for debate, the legalisation of sex work would ultimately provide protection for sex workers and help eradicate trafficking and abuse.
Sounds like Wikipedia.
It is Wikipedia. They all copied it out word for word every year, except this one boy, Lucas White, who wrote, sex work should be made legal so your mum pays tax on her earnings, which did provide a bit of light relief, if I'm honest.
I'm a sucker for the type of film which is essentially just two people talking to each other. And this is a really great example because it brings in some really interesting ideas about sex, sexuality, exploitation. In its story of a retired teacher, Emma Thompson, who hires a sex worker played by Daryl McCormack so she can finally have some satisfying sex, which she never got with her recently deceased husband. And as these two people meet up in the same hotel room for several encounters, they start talking to each other. I mean, Emma Thompson being very nervous, not really knowing how to cope with this, how to do this. I mean, She just has this verbal diarrhea talking about anything and everything. And through this constant talking, we get to understand this character. And we also get to understand her relationship with Daryl McCormack. And it's fascinating stuff. There is stuff about ethics and morals and exploitation and all that kind of stuff. It's also very, very funny. Which is probably because this is the script writing debut of the very, very funny comedienne Katie Brand, who I happen to know started a divinity degree when she was younger before losing her faith. So this idea of morals and ethics and having satisfying sex with a sex worker, there's some interesting stuff there, but both performances are great. The script is excellent, with so many moral and ethical questions, and also being very, very funny. And of this type of film, which is essentially just two people talking together, this is a really, really good example. And I had such a good time watching Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, that it has ended up as my number 10 cinematic film of 2022.
Cinematic. Number 9.
Oh non, c'est pas possible. Mais qu'est-ce que t'as fait? Je n'ai pas l'intention de le garder. Tais-toi. Qu'est-ce que je fais? Aidez-moi, il faut trouver quelqu'un là. Mais où? Comment? Ça ne nous regarde pas. Brigitte, enfant? Tu veux finir en prison avec elle? Tu fais ce que tu veux, Anne. Ça ne nous regarde pas.
There have been many films over recent years which tackle the subject of abortion. It has become one of those hot button issues which everybody's got an opinion on, and unfortunately the conservative right-wing whack jobs in many places across the world have got in the way of female reproductive rights, which is just ludicrous. And it is truly disturbing and horrifying how relevant this French film Happening is. It's set in the 1960s as a young student gets pregnant and wants to get an abortion. Unfortunately, abortion at the time was illegal in France. And it's so much harder than it needs to be when she wants to get an abortion. And this film is based on the autobiographical novel by Annie Arnaud. It's just horrifying how relevant it still is. Audrey Dewan, the writer-director of this film, won the Golden Lion at the 2022 Venice Film Festival for this, which I think was thoroughly deserved, and she has got an honourable mention as Best Director for me in my award show. As has the leading actress Anna Maria Bartolomei, who manages to portray this very intelligent young woman who nevertheless unfortunately ends up pregnant, and the hoops she needs to go through, the ways she needs to game the system, which is set up for her to have this unwanted baby. I mean, she wants to finish her studies. She's an intelligent woman who has potential to be a writer, a teacher, whatever. She doesn't want to end up being a housewife. And that's what will happen to her if she is forced to go ahead with this pregnancy. And it's just such a horrifying film in lots of different ways. I mean, this film does not shy away from the brutality and the horror of this situation. There are a couple of really, really uncomfortable scenes, but I believe they are necessary. When you are shown what happens when abortion is made illegal, women and girls are still going to do it, and they're going to do it in increasingly dangerous ways. If it's going to happen anyway, why not make it safe and healthy, or as safe and healthy as it possibly can be? And Yeah, I mean, there's some truly, truly horrifying things in this film. It's not for the faint of heart, but I do believe it is important. It's brilliantly directed, and Happening, I really do think, is one of the best films of 2022.
Cinematic. Number 8.
You know what, Anthony? I am sick to the back teeth of your fuck-ups being blamed on us. Look how hard everyone's working here. Look how hard everyone is working to earn you money. But you just haven't got a fucking clue. Okay. We're run off our asses here because you've overbooked, but you're so fucking stupid that you don't even know that you've done it, do you? Okay. Do you realise that you were overbooked?
Barley.
No. And on top of that, she's asking us to go off menu to cook fucking steak for some bullshit influencers. And you haven't put the allergies on the system, so we're having to refer to your scrawny handwritten fucking note all night.
I spoke a little earlier about how one of the things I am a big fan of is a film where it's just two people talking to each other, as in Good Luck to You, Leo, Grande. Another type of film I'm inordinately fond of is a film which has been made to look as if it is constructed in one take. And there were a couple, in fact there were several one-take films released in 2022, which I was a big fan of. And not one, but two of my best directors in my personal award show are for directors who achieved a one-take film, including this film, Boiling Point, written and directed by Philip Barantini, who I do believe, as is common with a lot of resting actors, and Philip Barantini started out as an actor, he was in Band of Brothers amongst other things, he did also used to work in restaurants and had this idea of, one night in the life of a chef, and he decided to do it in one take. So he tapped up his friend, fellow Liverpudlian Stephen Graham, and they did a 22-minute short film called Boiling Point. And then Philip Barantini was given the opportunity to expand this into a feature-length film. And he did. And he shot it in one take. This is not one of those films that is made to look as if it was one take. This was one take. They had 4 attempts at it at a real restaurant in Dalston in East London. Initially, they were intending to have 8 attempts at it, 2 attempts a night for 4 nights, but unfortunately they started filming in March 2020. So, yeah, COVID reared its ugly head and they had 4 attempts, but they did manage to do it, and they managed to pull it off remarkably well. On a technical level, Boiling Point is extraordinary. The choreography, the planning, the rehearsal that you need to do in order to achieve everything you need to achieve in one take using one Steadicam. And we do need to give a shout out to the cinematographer / Steadicam operator Matthew Lewis, who apparently spent weeks rehearsing for this film, which was handy since he was apparently Philip Barantini's roommate at the time. So, yeah, the technical skills which were needed to achieve this film are nothing to be sniffed at. But the actual film itself is also really, really fascinating. Unlike a lot of these one-take films, it's not just the story of one person. I mean, an excellent example is the film Victoria, the German film Victoria, which was my number 1 film of 2015-16, I think it was. But it was made to look as if it was one take. And we are just following this one Portuguese girl, Victoria, through the streets of Berlin as she gets involved in crime. But in Boiling Point, it's different. Yes, we are largely following Stephen Graham, as essentially his life completely collapses over the course of one night. At the start of the film, it has been established that he is in the middle of a reasonably acrimonious breakup, and he's letting things slide. I mean, he's not on the ball, he's not doing the paperwork correctly, he's not doing the prep work properly. he looks like he might be drinking on the job. It's not going well. And then there's a health inspection, a surprise health inspection at the beginning of the film, which he doesn't do well at. And then his friend slash rival, a famous TV chef, played by Jason Fleming, unexpectedly shows up. He shows up unannounced with a food critic in tow. So there's everything piling up and piling up and piling up on Stephen Graham. And he's not dealing with it very well. And that's the main part of the story. But we also get little tidbits from all the different people involved. Like there's a tiny, tiny moment in the kitchen where one of the very young chefs, an apprentice chef, is constantly being told, roll up your sleeves. You can't have your long sleeves dripping into the sauces or whatever. So when somebody grabs his arm and rolls up his sleeves for him, you see that he's got self-harming scars on his arms. And that's a little moment, and that's all we ever see of that story. I mean, a sympathetic person says, we can't right now, but we will talk about this later, and that's all we need. There's a irresponsible kitchen porter who's 2 hours late and quite possibly severely stoned on the job. There's Stephen Graham's right-hand woman, Vinette Robinson, has been offered a very, very lucrative job elsewhere and is strongly considering taking it. The maitre d' / manager of this restaurant is the daughter of the restaurant's owner and has no idea what she's doing, which you saw in that little clip I've just played. Everything is happening at once, and every little story, every little plot point has its moment to shine. Yes, it's largely about Stephen Graham and his life absolutely collapsing over the course of one night. He has very little to start the film with, but he loses it all by the end. But there's all these other different stories going on, and the camera follows each individual story as it goes along. And we get little moments of each of these stories, and it's done really, really well in this flowing steady cam moving around this restaurant way. And it's just really, really impressive. On a technical level, just managing to do it in one take, it's enormously impressive. But the storytelling is also remarkable, in my opinion. Boiling Point, and another one I'll be talking about in my streaming episode, and also one of the two films I'll be talking about in the Best Director category of my personal Golden Taps Awards. This was impressive, and I thoroughly recommend it. For me, it was one of the best films released cinematically in 2022.
Cinematic. Number 7.
Daddy, do you think me and that wee girl have a future?
Why the heck not?
You know she's a Catholic.
That wee girl can be a practicing Hindu, or a Southern Baptist, or a vegetarian Antichrist. But if she's kind, and she's fair, and you two respect each other, she and her people are welcome in our house any day of the week. Agreed.
There was an autobiographical film released in 2022 where the director reminisces about his childhood growing up in 1969 when he was 9 years old and in the shadow of the space race. And various issues and problems, typical coming-of-age stories happen, including having a somewhat distant father. But enough about Richard Linklater's Apollo 10½. I'm here to talk about Kenneth Branagh's Belfast. It was really, really weird when it suddenly struck me just how similar Apollo 10½ was to Belfast. There have been a lot of these nostalgic autobiographical films made by filmmakers examining their own childhood. But in the same year, to have two directors make a film about the same year when they were the same age, that was kind of weird. And looking it up, Richard Linklater is actually 5 months older than Kenneth Branagh. And that's a bit of cognitive dissonance. I mean, the type of filmmaker that Richard Linklater is and the type of filmmaker that Kenneth Branagh is, and Kenneth Branagh's younger, it was just baffling when I realised that. And it was the space project, the moon landing project that the little boy played by Jude Hill has with the Catholic girl he's got a crush on. Hang on, the moon landings happened, but didn't I just see that in Apollo 10.5? And yeah, they're the same age, which is weird. But anyway, just a little diversion there. I'm here to talk about Belfast, and it would be kind of easy to overlook Belfast in a rundown of films released into 2022 because it was released right at the beginning of 2022 in January, and it was in the wrong Oscar season, so to speak. I mean, here in the UK, Oscar season goes from the end of one year to the beginning of the next. And in my top 10 list of films, I have some films that were in the 2023 Oscars, indeed some films that won the 2023 Oscar, and some films that were in the 2022 Oscars. And Belfast was one of them. And I do think it's a film that needs to be remembered. It needs to be lauded because I think it does something really, really interesting. I think that this is a film which has the perfect blending of horror and whimsy. The idea of, growing up, having your first crush, playing with bin lids, pretending to slay dragons, and then instantly people with hard-edged eyes come and start throwing petrol bombs because the Troubles have just started. The mixture of the horrifying and the innocent, of the childlike and having to grow up, and eventually having to leave Belfast, Kenneth Branagh growing up essentially in Reading. Having that mixture in the same film, and everything being from the child's point of view. I mean, this little boy played by Jude Hill. We hear, as an audience, we understand what is going on simply because of the conversations that the young boy is overhearing. His parents, Katrina Balfe and Jamie Dornan, aren't telling him anything. He just has to overhear and interpret and figure things out for himself. And learning sectarianism for himself, having some not very helpful advice and mentorship from his slightly older cousin, Lara McDonnell, who herself doesn't really understand what she's talking about, and the brilliant riot scene at the end of the film, where it suddenly gets real. And interestingly, the shopkeeper in that scene is actually Kenneth Branagh's baby sister, who is the bump that Katrina Balfe has at the end of the film. It's that mixture of the halcyon innocence and the real-world horrors, all done in this beautiful black and white style, and telling that story of home and what that means and what happens when home changes. I think Belfast is excellent. I think it thoroughly deserved its 2022 Oscar for original screenplay. Finally getting Kenneth Branagh his Oscar. I mean, it was weird that was the first Oscar that Kenneth Branagh ever got. But yeah, I think it's excellent, and I think it shouldn't be overlooked in the best films of 2022 because it was released in January 2022.
Cinematic. Number 6.
You said you think I'm in trouble?
How much have you read about the World's Fair?
Just a little bit. I mean, I mostly just watch the videos online.
It goes a lot further back than that.
How?
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology, lore, history, and different theories and the supernatural events.
Many of the films I am talking about in this top 10 list are to some degree recognisable. I mean, the film I've just talked about, Belfast, I think that should have won Best Picture at the 2022 Oscars. Later in this top 10 show, I'm going to be talking about the film which did win Best Picture at the 2023 Oscars. Many of these films are recognisable. Some of them aren't, and I think this film, We're All Going to the World's Fair, is possibly the most obscure film I've included in this top 10 rundown. It would be very, very easy to overlook. Indeed, I myself did overlook it. I mean, the only access I had to it in the cinema, when it did get a brief cinematic run at the beginning of 2022, I would have had to make a special trip over to Bristol in order to see it. And I wasn't that interested in it to make the special trip. But fortunately, later in the year, it ended up being distributed on Shudder.com because it is basically a horror film. And I watched it on Shudder and I was absolutely blown away by it. And it has ended up as one of my top 10 cinematically released films of 2022. There have been many films over recent years about the dangers and the pitfalls and the horrors of social media and living your life online. Films on Shudder like Sissy, which is also excellent, Influencer, which I actually haven't watched yet, but it's got that thing. A few years back, we had the Aubrey Plaza film Ingrid Goes West, which is kind of disturbing and kind of great. There was also the found footage / screen life film Spree, where Joe Keery from Stranger Things is a Uber driver who kills his passengers online, and basically nobody watches it. Examining how we now live our lives online is a subject and an arena which is ripe for film, and particularly horror film. And this, I think, is a great example. As a young girl, played by first-time actor Anna Cobb, who, as best as I can tell, was 16 years old when this film was shot, and she has made it as my personal choice for the best young performer of 2022, a performer who was 18 or under when the film was shot. She's extraordinary. But this young girl, Anna Cobb, is taking part in an online challenge, the World's Fair Challenge, where you prick your thumb, smear it over your computer screen saying, I want to go to the World's Fair, I want to go to the World's Fair, I want to go to the World's Fair. So far, so Candyman. But the idea is that this challenge will transform you. If you participate in this challenge, you will be changed. And that's what Anna Cobb wants to do. And yeah, I think the subtext is there because the writer-director of this film, Jane Schoenbrunn, is a trans filmmaker, and their particular proclivities you can see in the subtext of this film. But this idea of transformation and becoming totally obsessed with this online challenge, this online game, and maybe getting too obsessed with it. Is it a game? Is it not? And either way, Anna Cobb is clearly struggling. This character is clearly doing dangerous things, possibly being a little bit neurodivergent. There's certainly elements of that, possibly not being cisgendered, given the filmmaker. This urgent need to transform becomes all this girl cares about, and it's all she has. Her mother's out of the picture. We only ever hear her father shouting up to her in her bedroom as she's doing these things in upstate New York, in Saugerties, New York. She has no connections to anybody or anything except online. Even when she needs comforting in order to try and get to sleep, the way she comforts herself, the way she soothes herself, is to project an ASMR YouTube video on the wall of someone whispering, saying, shh, shh, it's okay, it's okay. And that's how she soothes herself. That's the connection she has, is only online. And as far as I can tell, that was a real ASMR video that Jane Schoenbrunn found on YouTube and got permission to use. So this is a very isolated, very damaged, potentially mentally ill girl who has become obsessed with this game and is making these videos which nobody is watching except one person, who starts communicating with Anna Cobb. This guy, played by Michael J. Rogers, is saying, slow down, you're getting dangerous. I mean, these are weird things you're starting to do, you're starting to experience. Take a breath, have a consideration of what you're doing. And that's fine, but it's always a case of, is this real life or is it in-game? Is what Joseph L. Rogers is saying part of the game, or is he genuinely concerned? And that's always up for debate, and this is one of the things which made me really, really respond positively to We're All Going to the World's Fair, because I do love films where the objective reality of what we are seeing on screen is always up for question. And that's what this film is. What is going on? Is anything going on? Or is Anna Cobb just losing her mind? Here is a troubled young woman, a troubled girl, who's becoming obsessed. And how much is the obsession and how much is something dangerous happening? Nowadays, it is very easy for a young person to start losing their mind, to start sinking themselves into the online community. And when you do lose your mind, if you do lose your mind, it's very easy to do it performatively and to do it online. And that seems to be what's happening here. And this is particularly brought to bear by the conclusion of this film, which I'm going to briefly talk about. It's not much of a spoiler, but the end scene of this film, it takes the form of what you could easily see as an info dump, a large chunk of exposition. But it takes the form of a video which is intended to be posted online. So how much can that be trusted? Is this real life or is this still in-game? And we're never really sure. And that's the beautiful ambiguity of this film. It's clear that Anna Cobb is struggling with mental health issues, repeatedly talking about the fact she knows where her father's gun is, which is immensely disturbing. And she's doing this transformative creepypasta online, because that's essentially what this is. It's a creepypasta. The kind of online horror story/game that every individual person puts their own little bits into it. I mean, the most famous and notorious example of a creepypasta is The Slender Man. And this is kind of what this film is. It's creepypasta, the movie. And somebody becoming so obsessed with this creepypasta, with this story, with this challenge, that they're absolutely losing themselves in it. And it's kind of horrifying. And the fact that this 16-year-old girl, Anna Cobb, 15 or 16 years old as she was filming it, the way she manages to pull this off is remarkable. And I do think that Anna Cobb is somebody to pay attention to. Also in 2022, probably off the back of this film, which premiered at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival in their Midnight Strand, Anna Cobb actually got cast in Luca Guadagnino's film Bones and All, in a relatively small role as Timothée Chalamet's sister, but a small but crucial role in Bones and All. So yeah, look out for Anna Cobb. I think she's going to go far. And as far as I'm concerned, she was the best young performer of any film in 2022, 18 or under. I also think Jane Schoenbrunn deserves an honourable mention for Best Screenplay of 2022, because this obsessive girl, this story of a girl losing her mind in front of her computer screen, the way that Jane Schoenbrunn puts it together, I mean, they did such a good job. So, yeah, Best Young Performer of the Year, honourable mention as Best Screenplay of the Year. And I hope, if nothing else, if you do watch this video, it might encourage you to watch this film We're All Going to the World's Fair, which is available on streaming. It is available on Shudder.com, or at least it is here in the UK. It is available on Shudder.com. And I do recommend you check it out, because I do think this is one of the best films that had a cinematic release in the UK in 2022.
Cinematic. Number 5.
やっぱり今も東京？うん。じゃあこれから帰るの？うん。でも時間はある？ああ、お茶とか難しい？うん。あのさ、せっかくの再会なのにすっごくバカバカしいことなんだけど、うちに2時から4時の間に荷物が届くから受け取らないといけなくて。ああ、そっか。断ってるんじゃなくて、うち来る？え？もちろん時間があればなんだけど。お茶ぐらい出せるから。全然あるけどお邪魔じゃない？全然。今の時間は誰もいないし。いい？もちろん。
In recent years, it has become increasingly common for there to be one international feature, a film not in the English language, which gets nominated for Best Picture. And therefore you know exactly what is going to win Best International Feature at the Oscars. This has happened 4 out of the last 5 years. In 2019 we had Roma. In 2020 we had Parasite, which obviously also won Best Picture. This last year, 2023, we had All Quiet on the Western Front. And in 2022, we had the Japanese film Drive My Car. And not only did that get nominated for Best Picture and won Best International Feature, the writer-director of that film, Ryusuke Hamaguchi, also got nominated for Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay. There was just no way that Drive My Car wasn't going to win the International Feature Oscar 2 years ago. And I liked Drive My Car. It wasn't my absolute favourite of the year. I don't even think it should have won Best International Feature. My personal choice is my number one film on this video, which was eligible in the same category. But yeah, I liked Drive My Car fine. But thanks to a combination of delays in both making and distributing Drive My Car, thanks to the pandemic, only 4 months after Drive My Car premiered in Japan, Ryusuke Hamaguchi had another film released. And that same pattern was maintained in the UK distribution. Drive My Car was distributed in November 2021, and the next film by Ryusuke Hamaguchi, this film, Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, was distributed 4 months later in February 2022. And I think Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy is a better film than Drive My Car. I might be one of the few people in the world that thinks this, but I genuinely do feel this way. Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy is basically an anthology film. It is a series of 3 shorts, essentially, which is probably why it was so quickly produced after Drive My Car. You could just stitch some shorts together. But it's 3 individual stories, it's 3 individual vignettes, all of them heavily dialogue-based, all of them having some semblance of discussion of romance, of sex, of friendship, and also heavy doses of regret. And all 3 of them are just so intricately put together. They have these discussions, these ideas presented to you as an audience in really extraordinary ways. The pivotal scene of Drive My Car, the one which I think everybody remembers has the most impact, is a very long scene where 2 people are having a conversation in the back of the titular car in Drive My Car. And the first of these vignettes is also largely a conversation, or starts out as a conversation, in the back of a car. between a model and her best friend, who's also some kind of producer or executive who's organising the photo shoot they've just been on. But this model and her best friend are in the back of a car, getting driven home. And the one who isn't a model says, I just had the most amazing date. I mean, this guy, we spent 15 hours together. It was such a great connection. I can't believe how hard I've fallen for this guy so quickly. He's so heartbroken because his last girlfriend cheated on him 2 years ago and dumped him. But maybe we can have something together. And then after the friend is dropped off, the model turns around and finds the guy in question, because it turns out that, unbeknownst to her best friend, the model is the one who broke his heart 2 years ago. So a weird triangle starts there, and there's some explanation, some justification for her cheating on him, but and eventually they all three of them meet up together, and the morals, the ethics of romance and sexuality and friendship between these three people is all brought to bear. And it starts out as a conversation in the back of a car, like Drive My Car. The second one is a mature student who is basically a frustrated housewife and just wanting something to do. She's gone back to university and she's casually having sex with one of her young, virile classmates. And this young classmate persuades her, look, this particular professor we've both had classes with, he's trying to screw me over. So if he gets sacked because of a sex scandal, I can get my status back and my job prospects won't be damaged. So thinking, okay, I've got nothing better to do, I may as well help out my young friend by trying to seduce this professor. So this mature student goes and tries to seduce him, tries to create a sex scandal, and it doesn't go the directions you think. I mean, it ends up being a very, very long, very intense conversation about love and sex and relationships and the differences between the youth and a more mature version. And it's kind of almost a therapy session. I mean, almost the entirety of this middle vignette is this mature older woman, this mature student, figuring out her own life, her own sexuality, and coming to terms with her own sexuality. And it's actually helpful in a really intense, really interesting way. And it gradually morphs from, I want to seduce this guy for the sake of my lover. It turns into, I want to seduce this guy because actually I'd kind of like to have sex with him myself. So yeah, there's some really interesting dynamics in that. And that ends in a horrifically ironic and tragic way. And the final one of these three vignettes is a very, very queer-coded woman, short hair, Doc Martens, is going to her 20-year high school reunion, clearly wanting to connect with her first love, the girl she first had a bond with, first had a relationship with, and is very disappointed when this crush she had doesn't show up to the reunion. So she's just about to leave her hometown forever, going down to the train station, when coming up the escalator the other way is the object of her affection. And they have the conversation. They go, look, I'd like to have a conversation, but I'm actually expecting a parcel, so why don't you just come home with me? So these two women try and reconnect and work through the issues they had when they were both in high school, where this woman was not brave enough to fully come out and say, I love you. But there was clearly a connection there, a bond there. But as this meeting progresses, it realizes that a fundamental mistake has been made and things are not as they seem. And that goes in some really fascinating directions. So in all of these situations, we have discussions of intimacy, of romance, of sex, but there's a lot of misapprehensions. There's a lot of stuff related to coincidence. And all of it is really, really fascinating. I mean, I'm a big fan of very, very dialogue-heavy films. this year there were a couple of very, very dialogue heavy, basically just two people talking to each other movies, which have made my top 10 lists. In the cinematic list, we had Good Luck to You, Grande. In the streaming list, we've had Language Lessons. Basically just two people talking to each other, and the conversations become really, really intense, really, really intimate. And in Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, that basically happens 5 times. In the first vignette, we have the conversation between the two women, and we have the model going back to her ex-boyfriend, and then all three of them meet up at the end. So that's 3 intimate conversations. The middle one, we have this really, really intense conversation between the professor and the student trying to seduce him. And then in the third one, we have these 2 people who haven't seen each other for a very, very long time, trying to connect and trying to figure out their issues. And it's all really, really intimate, really, really intense. And in a lot of cases, are rather ironically tragic. I mean, in the first case, it's unlikely, but it does happen, that the boyfriend you've just had is your best friend's ex from 2 years ago. Unlikely, but it does happen. In the middle one, the fact that this doesn't make sense out of context, but trust me, the fact that the professor's name is the same as the Japanese equivalent of DHL, that turns into a hugely ironic and tragic mistake. And in the third one, there is a fundamental misapprehension about the 2 things. You do have this random meeting. It does happen, but it turns out that there's misapprehensions going on. And the intricacies, the intimacies of all these conversations is really, really well done. I really, really like this kind of dialogue-heavy movie. I am giving Ryusuke Hamaguchi an honourable mention for Best Screenplay of 2022 as well. And this is just brilliant. It is one of my top 10 cinematic films of 2022, and it's also got an honourable mention as a Best International Film of 2022, and I thoroughly, thoroughly recommend it. Over Drive My Car. Yes, I did like Drive My Car, but I love Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy. And it's for this film that I think Ryusuke Hamaguchi is one of, or starting to become, one of this generation's great filmmakers. I really do like, and I really do recommend Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy.
Cinematic. Number 4.
Alex Dahl. Presidential scholar. I actually thought they were fucking with me. Trying to put a wedge between us, but there it is. Oh, and I checked. Presidential scholars, they get a full ride.
I never said I needed a scholarship.
Sure shit, let me think it. You know this whole team thinks you're fucking insane? I was your friend. I had your back from day one. And you were supposed to have mine.
It's one of my repeated mantras that one of the things that the Oscars consistently gets wrong is a situation where there is an outstanding acting performance in a film that just happens to be really, really small, and therefore doesn't have the budget, doesn't have the attention in order to get that Oscar nomination. For years, my perfect example of this phenomenon was Rebecca Hall in the film Christine. She was outstanding in that film, but it was just too small a film, so a genuinely Oscar-worthy performance was overlooked. Obviously, the paradigm has slightly shifted this year in the 2023 Oscars, with Andrea Riseborough getting that nomination for To Leslie, which honestly I don't think was deserved. I think she was better in the Northern Irish film Here Before. But things have changed, and I just wished they'd changed 1 year earlier. Because in my opinion, one of the most outstanding actress performance in the 2022 Oscar cycle was Isabel Fuhrman in this film, The Novice. And this is so impressive because Isabel Fuhrman is probably still best known for being the little girl in the horror film Orphan. And also in 2022, Isabel Fuhrman was in a prequel to Orphan, which is weird on several levels. But Isabel Fuhrman has managed to carve out herself a decent career past Orphan. And being in this film, The Novice, I think she was outstanding. And for my money, she was the best actress of 2022. In this film, which is the feature-length directorial debut of writer-director Lauren Hadaway, who has mostly been working as a sound editor and Foley editor, ADR editor, etc. for various Hollywood productions. But she made her feature-length debut with this film, The Novice, somewhat inspired by her own experiences as a collegiate rower. And Isabel Fuhrman plays a collegiate rower who is in the novice team. Someone who has no background in rowing, but hey, you're athletic enough, you're tall enough, maybe you'd like to try rowing, and maybe if you're successful, you can get into the varsity boat and maybe get a scholarship. And Isabel Fuhrman does this and becomes absolutely obsessed with it. It's not like she even needs it. She's already got a scholarship, and other people she's competing with don't have scholarships. But there's something in front of her, and there's a ranking, and she needs to be top of that ranking. She needs to get into the varsity boat. And she doesn't really seem to love or even like rowing. She just needs to be the best. And this obsessive pursuit of perfection affects her friendships and her relationships. Isabel Fuhrman in this film is gay, and it's like the fifth most important thing about this character. And the relationship she has with her ex-TA, it's actually quite sweet, but eventually it falls apart because Isabel Fuhrman needs to be the best. She obsessively retakes and retakes and retakes every test she's put in front of her because she needs to be absolutely perfect. And this is a brilliant, brilliant examination of obsession. There's a lot of Black Swan in this. There's a lot of Whiplash in this, which is interesting because Lauren Hadaway worked as a sound editor on Whiplash. But putting yourself through absolute hell in order to be the best is basically what Isabel Fuhrman is doing in this film, The Novice. And yes, while primarily I really, really appreciate this Novice for the outstanding leading performance from Isabel Fuhrman, the filmmaking itself is also really, really fascinating. And Lauren Hadaway, as a director, is also a name to really keep an eye out for. Because there's fantasy sequence, dream sequences, even hallucinations, you could argue, which become part of this story. As Isabel Fuhrman sinks further and further and further into this obsession, she starts having these hallucinations, we'll call them. The mascot for this college rowing team is a crow. So the image of a crow and the sound of crows cawing becomes part of Isabel Fuhrman's psychological makeup. There's also a term in rowing called catching a crab, where a misjudged stroke slows down the boat. So Isabel Fuhrman also starts hallucinating crabs and boiling crabs. And this becomes more and more pervasive in her life. And there's also a couple of places where the physical exertion of being on a rowing machine, I mean, it starts out into like a dingy basement workout room for the rowing team, but eventually all the light falls away and we're just focused on these women on the rowing machines, and it's dimly lit, and you see the glowing, sweaty bodies of the women as they're exerting themselves, and eventually they fall down panting and sweating and looking at each other, and there's some subtext going on there, but it's done really, really well by Lauren Hadaway. I mean, having this physical euphoria of, you know, the endorphins and the adrenaline, that's part of exercising. So having all these visual and sound cues in the film, I mean, with her background as a sound editor, Lauren Hadaway does some really, really excellent stuff with the sound design of this film. The filmmaking itself becomes really, really impressive. But more than anything, the central performance from Isabel Fuhrman is outstanding. And I do think that Isabel Fuhrman is the best actress of this year. And I also think The Novice as a film is an honourable mention as best film of the year. It's an excellent film, and I really hope more people discover it and more people seek it out, because I do think that The Novice is one of the best films released cinematically in the UK in 2022.
Cinematic. Number 3.
I've been Pompo's assistant for about a year now.
I'm so sorry.
Being able to pick the brain of one of the industry's greats from such a young age.
With the right lead, Pompo can transform any screenplay into a good movie.
Watching and learning from the sidelines.
Gene, hey! I'm going to let you shoot this screenplay of mine. Best of luck, Director Gene.
Okay, so I am fully aware that this is an incredibly obscure film to be this prominently featured in these videos. It had a blink and you'll miss it release cinematically, with, at least speaking personally, there were 2 screenings I could get to cinematically in my entire region. As far as I can tell, the only way you can now legally get this film is as a Blu-ray through the specialist company All the Anime. But it did get a cinematic release, and therefore it qualifies for these videos. And not only, in my personal opinion, does this deserve an honourable mention as Best Animated Film of the Year, it also ended up as an honourable mention for Best International Film of the Year and Best Film. Because, weird as it is to say, Pompo the Cinéphile does one thing extraordinarily well. I've been doing some form of film review. I've been a podcaster for over a decade. I've done these videos for the last few years. And because of that, I have become really fascinated by and really interested in the actual process of filmmaking. The nuts and bolts, how it works, the behind the scenes machinations that you need to do in order to create a film. And weird as it is to say, Pompo the Cinéphile is, I think, the best film I have ever seen about the process of filmmaking. And there have been many films over the years which delve into this. Living in Oblivion is a brilliant example if you haven't seen that. 8.5, Night for Day, La La Land even. I mean, all these different films about how hard it is to make a film. And I think Pompo the Cinéphile does it possibly the best. Or at least one specific thing it does better than I have ever seen any other film do, any film about the filmmaking process. And that is exploring what it is that a producer does. Because this film is based around Pompo, who is a typical anime character. She's smaller and cuter than the rest of the people around her. She has massive pigtails. She's always wearing a pinafore dress, in that kind of Lolita-ish style, the Japanese aesthetic of the Lolita. Yet, she is very, very talented at being a film producer. She inherited her grandfather's company and has made it very, very successful. She's enormously powerful, enormously popular. She creates essentially exploitation films, the kinds of films that people want to watch, with actresses with big boobs and bikinis fighting off sea monsters. And it just so happens that Pompo's best friend is a busty actress who appears in a lot of her films. And she's unapologetic about this. She says, look, this is what people want. This is the entertainment that I provide. There's a running gag in Pompo the Cinéphile of how the best type of films are exactly 90 minutes long. And guess how long Pompo the Cinéphile is if you take off the credits at the beginning, the company idents at the beginning? exactly 90 minutes, which is brilliant. But she is a producer, and this film explores what it is to be a producer and how that functions, what that job entails. And that includes not only writing a script, but allowing her, hangdog assistant, who is obsessed with filmmaking, is desperate to become a director, but he's working as Pompo's assistant, and he finds this script and says, "Hey, this is really, really good stuff. So, will you let me make it?" And Pompo does. And it becomes about the filmmaking process. I mean, casting this enormously powerful and successful actor who hasn't acted for 10 years, the greatest actor of his generation, and casting him opposite an ingenue making her film debut. And this film gets made, and then towards the end of the film, we also have kind of a Kill Your Darlings segment where this hangdog director, Gene, has to edit down this, the 4 or 5 hours of footage he shot to 90 minutes. And he has to kill his darlings. Scenes he absolutely loves, scenes that he's very, very passionate about, they have to go. And the pressure and the pain and the sacrifice you need to make in order to become a successful filmmaker. That is another thing which Pompo the Cinéphile is definitely about. I mean, this is an insider's look at Hollywood, or in the film, Nyala word, which is, Nyal is kind of the Japanese version of meow, so there's cats everywhere, which is odd. But the way that the Hollywood system works, the way you need to sacrifice, the way you have all different things in order to make something great, in order to make art, all of that is brought to bear. And in this relatively cheesy, relatively ostentatious, it's got typical anime styles like, overly exaggerated reactions, over exaggerated character design. It has anime tropes, but it really is one of the best films I have ever seen about the process of filmmaking. And I genuinely think it's brilliant. So yes, laugh at me if you like. I know this is an incredibly obscure film, but I really, really do think that Pompo the Cinéphile deserves honourable mentions as Best Animated Film of the Year, Best International Film of the Year, and Best Film of the Year. It's that good, and I really, really hope you do manage to see it, even if, it's likely you're going to have to get it through extra legal means unless you want to buy a Blu-ray. But yeah, Pompo the Cinéphile is excellent, and I really, really hope that you get the opportunity to see it, because I do think it's one of the best films that was released cinematically, albeit briefly, in 2022.
Cinematic. Number 2.
I have felt everything your daughter has felt. I know the joy and the pain of having you as my mother.
Then you know I would only do the right thing for her. For you.
Right is a tiny box invented by people who are afraid. And I know what it feels like to be trapped inside that box.
好朋友，老友嚟㗎。
Mom.
I've been a film podcaster for over a decade now, and in those years and years of online film criticism, one of the things I consistently come back to is the fact that the Oscars are fundamentally broken. Unless you are a pretty big film and usually somehow connected to the Hollywood studio system, you can't get nominated. You can't get the type of publicity campaign you need in order to get an Oscar nomination and indeed an Oscar win. And time again, very, very worthy and deserving films and performances get overlooked because they're just too small or just too weird. But every now and again, the Oscars does get it right. and every now and again a very, very weird, very, very maximalist film, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, sweeps the Oscars. And indeed, it's kind of swept my Golden Taps Awards. It's the film with the most individual citations. Everything Everywhere All at Once has won my personal award for Best Director and Best Supporting Actress for Stephanie Hsu, not Jamie Lee Curtis, and also has honourable mentions for Best Film, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actor. That's a haul. That's the most citations in my awards. And that shows you how much I like this film and how much it astonishes me that this weird film did so well, not only critically and commercially, but also at the Oscars. This idea of the multiverse has weirdly become very, very popular over the last few years. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once was only released a couple of weeks after Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which wasn't nearly as good or successful. We've had the Spider-Verse movies as well. I mean, we've now got 2 of them, and various other things along the way. So this idea of alternative dimensions, different decisions branching off into different versions of yourself, that has become so acceptable that it kind of doesn't matter when a film like this kind of breaks through and manages to create something which people can latch on to. And the way that Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, wrote and directed this film, it's just so vast. This idea of all these different versions of Michelle Yeoh having all these different lives, and how you need to protect not only your world, but also multiple worlds that are all now interconnected. The multiverse needs to be protected at large, as well as your individual version of it on a micro level. And yes, there is conflict. I mean, there is awesome fight choreography. I mean, Michelle Yeoh is, I think, over 60 now, or very close to it. So I'm not sure how much of her own fight choreography she did, but she's still an awesome martial artist and indeed awesome actress. Kei Kwan is still an awesome martial artist. That scene with the fanny pack, with the bum bag, is one of the best fight scenes I've seen in decades. But what I really, really like about this film is that the fighting is not necessarily the most important thing. I mean, yes, it is there. Yes, there is multiverse spreading threats to our protagonists. But more than anything, it's a film about the mother-daughter relationship. Ultimately, the victory of this film is not some victory because of fighting, because of conflict. It is a victory because of talking. It is a victory because we are embracing the idea of kindness. One of the things that Kei Kwan brings to this film, or the character played by Kei Kwan, is his dedication, his absolute conviction that everything can be solved with kindness. I mean, can't we just be nice to each other? And yeah, you kind of can, and it kind of works. And that's just marvellous. I mean, yes, there are fight scenes. There's a weird amount of butt stuff in this with those awards that look like butt plugs and are used as butt plugs. So, I mean, there's absurdity here, but it's fundamentally about the ideas, about the relationships. I mean, one of the most powerful and emotionally devastating scenes is a scene between 2 rocks. 2 rocks on a cliff, and we see a conversation between these 2 rocks in the subtitles. And it's one of the more emotionally powerful scenes in the entire film. How do you pull that off? The way that Daniels managed to do it was so impressive. I mean, we've had a lot of this kind of maximalist filmmaking recently, like Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, Iñárritu's Bardo, RRR, which I personally didn't watch, but it has that maximalist thing. And Everything Everywhere All at Once is a maximalist film that actually won Best Picture and came close to sweeping the entire Oscars. What did you think? It was 7 or 8 Oscars it got in the end? But it's remarkable. I think it's a fantastic, exuberant film with lots of great ideas in it, lots of great action in it, lots of great absurdity in it. All around, it's just great. And Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of the best films I've seen in quite some time. As far as this kind of maximalist, weird, exuberant filmmaking goes, it's a fantastic example. So yes, Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of the best films of 2022, deserves its place as an honourable mention for Best Picture and all those other awards as well. And I'm sure you know about it, I'm sure you appreciate it, but I mean, yes, even though one of the things I'm trying to do is promote really, really obscure films, sometimes the really prominent ones also deserve recognition, and this is one of those cases. And I do think that Everything Everywhere All at Once is one of the best films released into the UK during 2022.
Cinematic. Number 1.
Then the container is loaded onto a gigantic cargo ship, boxed in by containers all around it, blockades so you can't get out.
I've been doing some form of top 10 films of the year list for 13 years now. In some format, mostly on my audio podcasts. And this is the first time in 13 years that I have a film that is a Grand Slam champion. My number one film that was released into the UK cinemas in 2022 is an animated documentary from Denmark. Therefore, my best film of 2022 in the UK cinemas is my best film of the year, my best international film of the year, my best animated feature of the year, and my best documentary of the year. And that's just remarkable. I don't think I've ever had a film that was even eligible in all those categories since I've been doing these lists. I mean, the only other example I can think of is Waltz with Bashir, which came out a couple of years before I started doing my podcast. But my best film of the year in all those categories is Flea. As soon as I saw it as part of the 2021 London Film Festival touring programme over in the Watershed Cinema in Bristol, I instantly knew this was going to be one of my best films of the year, and it turned out to be the best film of 2022. And when I had the opportunity to get a poster of the film from my local little theatre, the Picture House chain, they sell their old posters in aid of the Refuge charity. And when I saw one for Flea, I instantly bought it and I put it up behind me, part of my ambience in my recording space. And I've kept it up because it made sense to record this video in front of a Flea poster, even though my cat's been at it and it's falling apart a bit, and she's already had that one down as well. So yes, as soon as I finish this video, I'm going to be replacing that, but I needed to record this video in front of my Flea poster because it really is a remarkable piece of work. It is directed by Jens Pehr Rasmussen, a Danish director who has known this Afghan refugee immigrant into Denmark, Amin Nawabi, since they were 15. And Jonas Pehr Rasmussen wanted to make a film about Amin and his life, but he needed to do it in a delicate way because there are facts about Amin's life. That means there's a chance, a reasonably slim chance, but still a chance, that Amin could be deported from Denmark. So he needs to keep his identity secret. Therefore, he ended up putting this documentary, this discussion with his childhood friend, in animated form. And I think this was mostly a practical consideration to conceal Amin's identity. But it actually ends up being a really, really fascinating and a really compelling way to make this movie. It has that kind of Lean Claire thing that Hergé used to do in his Tintin comics. Very bold lines, no cross-hatching, very simple, direct, almost flattened animation. And it looks really, really good. But when there are situations which are either A, too traumatic for Amin to remember fully, or B, things he didn't personally witness, the animation style gets a little bit more abstract, a little bit more messy. Or in places it's almost charcoal drawings. And it's really, really effective. It reminded me of the fantastic Studio Ghibli film, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. I think that was the last film of the late Isao Takahata of Grave of the Fireflies. But yeah, Tale of the Princess Kaguya is another one I strongly recommend. But in Flea, having these variations in animation style, in presentation, having the direct and occasionally very, very harrowing and very, very traumatic facts of Amin's life, but occasionally having these little abstract moments as well, it really creates a fascinating visual style. And I think it also helps to create a little bit of distance as well. Hearing this genuinely harrowing story and having either recreations or actual footage of this story, this journey, would possibly be too difficult to do. But when you have animation, when it is drawn, there's that tiny, tiny bit of distance, that little bit of distance that allows you to digest it and approach it in a much more comprehensive way. So, I mean, there's so many reasons for doing this film animated, and all of them work. And it is a harrowing story. It really does deal with the traumas and the issues that are created when you need to leave your country. When I went into this film, I knew it was about a gay Afghan man who ended up in Denmark. And my thought was, okay, he needed to flee because he was gay. But no, his entire family needs to leave simply because in the late 80s, early 90s, the communists are coming in and they need to escape. Their father is disappeared for being a pilot. I'm not exactly sure if he was a military or civilian pilot, but either way, he's gone. And his family need to escape. Initially, they escaped to Russia, but this is the Russia just after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and there's hyperinflation, no food on the streets, and incredibly racist policemen who just go up to somebody and say, hey, you're an illegal immigrant, give me all your money. And if you happen to be a female illegal immigrant, hey, you can pay another way. It's like, yeah. That's one of the most horrifying scenes in the entire film. Not that we actually see anything, but the concept of that happening, it is just horrifying. And that's just one of many, many instances that it demonstrates just how hard and just how difficult this guy's life has been. And basically, he's ended up with a massive amount of survivor's guilt. The sacrifices that his family needed to make in order to get him to safety in Denmark are so huge, they are so many. And he is constantly asking himself, do I deserve this? Do I deserve to be an educated academic who is repeatedly going on lecture tours to the United States? Do I deserve to have a stable, loving relationship with a Danish man? Do I deserve to move in with him? Do I deserve to marry him? I mean, so many good things are happening to me, and my family has sacrificed so much, and they were in terrible situations for so long. Maybe I don't deserve this. But another thing that is done in this film is the fact that it's also a film about friendship. I mean, this filmmaker, Jonas Per Rasmussen, has known Amin since they were 15. And in making this film about Amin's life, I think there's some genuine catharsis. I mean, this is almost a therapy session with Amin working through his issues, working through his traumas, and coming to a happy conclusion. I genuinely think Amin's life is greatly improved after participating in this film. I mean, and a film that got lots of international attention. It won a Best Independent Animated Film Award at the Annecy Film Festival, the biggest animation festival in the world. It got submitted by Denmark to the Oscars in the International Feature category and got nominated. It was nominated for Best Animated Feature as well. Of course, it didn't win, although it deserved to. And it got international distribution. I mean, the English dub, which I played a little bit of just now, the people who are voicing Jonas Per Rasmussen and Amin are Nikolai Coster-Waldau and Riz Ahmed. Genuine Hollywood stars doing the dub for this film. So yeah, I mean, it's got so much attention, so much acclaim, and deserved acclaim. And it really does have everything you could possibly want. It shows the harrowing situation, the harrowing life of somebody who needs to flee. But it also has a little bit of positivity. I mean, there's scenes towards the end where Amin and his partner, actually end up together, actually get married. There's some joy there as well. So, yeah, I mean, enough positivity with the actual story, and enough distance given that it is the animated style, but it still tells this story of trauma, of heartbreak, and occasionally some really, really disturbing stuff. And also, it's a good queer film. I mean, this boy growing up in a Muslim country as a gay boy, and desperately trying to keep this hidden from his family. But since in the opening scene we have a flashback of an 8-ish-year-old Amin dancing on the streets of Kabul wearing one of his sister's dresses to Aha on his Walkman, I think his family knew. So, I mean, there's all that as well. So it works as a queer movie as well. And honestly, that it surprised me after I'd watched Flea that was as little a part of this film as it was. It's much more about the traumas and the survivor's guilt of this life lived when you need to flee. And it's excellent. It really is one of the best animated films I've ever seen. It's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It works on so many different levels, and I think unquestioningly the best film that was released into UK cinemas in 2022 was Flea.
Cinematic. Honourable mention.
So now I leave you with a list of honourable mentions that I did want to highlight but didn't quite break into my actual top 10 of the year. We've got some pretty obscure films, we've got some Oscar-nominated and even an Oscar-winning film in this list, as well as many films that I think should have got nominated for and indeed won Oscars. But maybe you will find something you didn't know about, or maybe this will nudge you to encounter something you have heard about but were on the fence about. But yes, these are some excellent films that I also wanted to highlight. And a reminder that I am planning to put together a top 10 streaming films of 2022 video as well. And also my personal Oscars, my awards show, the Golden Taps, which I have been flagging here and there during this video. So all of those videos will be coming hopefully reasonably shortly. But until then, I think that's all I've got for you. And it just remains for me to say that this has been a presentation of Yay, Nay or Meh. I've been your host, Colin Gaisley, coming to you from Bath in the southwest of England. And I will see you next time, where I shine a light on cinema, both obvious and obscure.